Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Andrew Frost. I'm one of the aviation medical examiners for the Midwest region, Central Iowa in particular, and the following PowerPoint presentation should be able to help you understand the process and better prepare for your first aviation medical examination. If you have any questions, please feel free to place them in the comments section. If you'd like to make an appointment with me, I will place all the contact information down in the description. Thank you and enjoy the presentation. This first slide is actually directed at the people who want to make aviation their profession. And I'm willing to bet that for the majority of you, this is not your first occupation, that you have done something before and becoming a pilot is something that you've matured into. Often doctors and pilots are compared primarily because we have similar personality types and because our jobs at times can be stressful and require a lot of detail. For me, first I became a welder and a fabricator, and then later on I went to school, became a motorcycle mechanic, and after a fairly serious injury, I developed an interest in medicine, and I started out as an EMT, then became a paramedic, and eventually I became a doctor. Guess what none of those professions required? None of them required an excruciatingly detailed physical and history. So why are airmen held to a higher standard? That they're required to have frequent physicals that determine whether they can fly or not, whether they can earn money or not, and make a living. So we need to look at the context. And the context is, as comparison, well, how many people do doctors kill each year? The number is actually staggering. It's 250,000 Americans die each year from some sort of medical error. 250,000 people. In contrast, how many people do pilots kill each year? On average, 548 people die each year from plane crashes. So the minuscule number of approximately one fatality for every 1 million flight departures. But in the medical world, if we kill someone, it's not big news. But in the aviation world, if there's a plane crash, it's making headlines. And I'm sure we all remember last summer when the P-63 fighter collided with a B-17 in an air show. We all saw the footage of that. We all remember, the miracle on the Hudson where Captain Sully put the plane down after multiple bird strikes and was able to successfully land in the Hudson River, and I don't think there were any fatalities from his inadvertent landing, I guess would be the best way to put it. So which of these, this is where, as a physician and a medical examiner, this is where I come in. So which of these crashes could have been preventable? Well, Emily Collette was a stunt pilot, and she crashed, and on the postmortem, it was found that she had multiple very occluded coronary arteries. And the question arises, is this a crash that could have been prevented? Since this PowerPoint was designed for aviation students, I wanted to point out to them that they can't even trust their instructor not to die in mid-flight. And this was a case fairly recently where, and I believe they were flying at night, the pilot suffered a heart attack. There was a student pilot on board. However, unfortunately, the landing did not go well. So we're going to talk about the types of FAA medical certificates at this point. And I love this picture because this kind of represents where aviation will eventually go. So as an aviation medical examiner, we're not just doing pilots who fly planes, but also we would be capable of examining astronauts as well because they're pilots in their own right. And with civilian astronauts becoming more and more common, we're going to see something more like this. And you may recognize the picture from the movie Armageddon, where NASA basically recruits a bunch of drillers to drill on an asteroid to blow it up and save the Earth. Sounds ridiculous, but every day this kind of reality is becoming more likely. So we have the types of FAA medical certificates. First, there is the basic medical, which my clinic will not be offering. Essentially, it is an alternative method for people who already hold an FAA medical certificate to fairly easily get an extension on that. And essentially, you just need to have a driver's license. There are certain limitations. You can't carry more than 5 passengers. You must operate a plane that has a maximum weight of less than 6,000 pounds. There is restrictions with special issuances, and the duration is a state licensed medical exam every 4 years and a medical self-assessment course every 2 years. There is, for the people who are professional pilots and airline pilots, there is the first class medical, which is a little bit more detailed and more often than the second and third class. Now, as an upfront, I should let you know that since I am a new medical examiner, we probably won't be offering the first class medical certificates right away, but probably within a year of this filming, we certainly will be. So you can always call the number down in the description, and we can let you know how we're doing on the process of that. Essentially, the examination is, if you're older than 40, it's good for 6 months. If you're under the age of 40, it's good for a year. And as you can see up on the PowerPoint here, there's just some basic guidelines. The only real difference between this and the second and third class is there's a little bit of more detail in the vision test, and it requires an EKG. So second class medical, which is for commercial pilots, and basically the duration is for a year. It's actually a pretty easy test or easy examination in the respect of, the vision's pretty basic, and as long as you have corrections, you're okay. Your blood pressure needs to be below 155/95, and you need to be able to pass a conversational hearing test or an audiometry test. Third class medical, again, it's a longer duration, probably about the same as far as a second class medical for the basic examination itself. But the duration is, if you're older than 40, you can get it for 2 years. If you're less than 40, you get it for 5 years. So what is the role of the aviation medical examiner? So in short, my job, or those like me, is to make every effort to assure the FAA, which is your certifying body, that the airman is mentally and physically fit enough to perform the duties and endure the stresses of being a pilot. So my main job is actually the protection of the flying and non-flying public by using the FAA guidelines to attempt to predict that a pilot won't have a sudden disabling event while performing his or her duties. But that may change, because as technology improves and increases in availability, we're going to see some restrictions probably maybe easing up even. Take, for example, the plane on the right of the screen here, which is the Cirrus G2 Plus. It's a $3.5 million private jet that essentially, if you press the red button on the ceiling, anybody can press this red button on the ceiling if something happens to the pilot. The plane will actually initiate full automated emergency procedures. It will contact the local airport that's appropriate for it to land at. It will initiate a landing procedure, and it will also notify emergency services to be there when you get to the ground. And as well, if things really go sideways, there is an airframe parachute system where essentially you punch out the rocket-powered parachute, and relatively gently it lowers the plane to the ground. So who does the AME work for? Do I work for the FAA? No. More likely, the best description would be that I'm an independent contractor, but I do answer to the FAA. So the question arises, if you have a medical health problem, can the AME prescribe medications for you? So for all intents and purposes, the AME is an investigator. It's not your doctor. If there's a disqualifying condition discovered, he can refer you back to your physician to see if the issue can be quickly and appropriately managed, or he may defer your application to the FAA for their decision. I think it's important to reiterate, the aviation medical examiner is not your doctor. But if you pick the right one, he can be your advocate, and he should be your advocate. Keeping in mind that the aviation medical examiner's first duty is to the public. So how can the AME be your advocate? Well, he can communicate any concerns with the FAA and help get their guidance on the best way to alleviate the issue. He can guide you on what needs to be done to satisfy the FAA, either directing you back to your doctor so you can get the appropriate letters of recommendation or statements that whatever health condition you have has been taken care of. And certainly it's within the job description that being efficient and staying within the timeline that the FAA lays out. And essentially, once we start the application in the office, we got 14 days to get everything done. Before we get started, let's talk about the 15 health disqualifiers that may keep you from getting your medical certificate. Here they are, big list, and you can read through as I talk about them. But essentially, angina, essentially that's heart pains that may get better with nitroglycerin, bipolar disease, mental illness, cardiac valve replacement, coronary heart disease, diabetes, any disturbance of consciousness that doesn't have a satisfactory explanation, epilepsy, of course, no one wants you to have a seizure while you're flying, heart replacement, a heart attack, a permanent cardiac pacemaker, any personality disorder that is severe enough it repeatedly manifests itself, psychosis, substance abuse, substance dependence, or a transient loss of control of the nervous system function without a satisfactory explanation. Now, these are disqualifiers, but they don't necessarily stop you from getting your certificate, but they need to be addressed. So if you have any one of the 15 disqualifiers on your medical application, your aviation medical examiner cannot issue a medical certificate until it is cleared under the FAA under what is known as a special issuance authorization. Special issuances, essentially there's challenges to special issuances, but you have to remember that the FAA actually is working for you and they want you in the air, but they also want to make sure that you're safely flying and won't have any problems. This is a very wordy slide, and I apologize, but the FAA has some very specific wording which I need to go through. So at his discretion, the federal air surgeon may grant an authorization for a special issuance of a medical certificate authorization with a specified validity period to an applicant who does not meet the established medical standards. So basically, the air surgeon can say, okay, you can fly for a certain amount of time, but we may need to check back on you occasionally. The applicant must demonstrate to the satisfaction of the federal air surgeon that the duties authorized by the class of medical certificate applied for can be performed without endangering public safety for the validity period of the authorization. That's a very wordy paragraph, and basically it means at his discretion, the federal air surgeon can allow you to fly as long as he feels that it's not dangerous during whatever period they determine you can fly for. Next, the federal air surgeon may authorize a special medical flight test, practical test, or medical evaluation for this purpose. So essentially, they can give you any test that they can dream up if it makes them happy and satisfied that you can fly safely. So there's also what's called a SOTA, which is a statement of demonstrated ability. And a SOTA, again, everything's at the discretion of the federal air surgeon. So a SOTA may be granted instead of an authorization to a person whose disqualifying condition is static or non-progressive, and who has been found capable of performing the airman duties without endangering the public safety. It doesn't expire, and basically it authorizes an examiner such as myself to issue a medical certificate as long as nothing's changed too much. So there may be some confusion between a special issuance and a SOTA. A SOTA, as you can see by our gentleman in the upper picture here, would be like someone is missing a leg. And as long as he can prove that he can fly the plane with one leg or, say, one eye, then he can get qualified for a SOTA because he's stable. A special issuance, on the other hand, is something that's not stable. So something along the lines of diabetes, where there perhaps could be a progression or something that requires a follow-up because there may be a change in the condition, and that's where a special issuance would come in to play. So there are what are called CACIs, which are conditions that aviation medical examiners can issue. And essentially, this is a series of conditions which the FAA has listed, and there's certain qualifications. And if the applicant meets the parameters of that worksheet, we can go ahead and issue your certificate. For example, we have here asthma, and there's a lot of conditions I'm here to tell you. So with asthma, essentially, so the person has mild or seasonal symptoms. My job would be to review all the pertinent medical information and current status report from your doctor, including the PFTs, duration of symptoms, name and dosage of the drugs, and side effects for a special issuance consideration. And then I would look at the CACI worksheet, and if you met the qualifications, I would issue you your medical certificate. If it fell outside of those qualifications, then the FAA would get involved. This is the CACI worksheet, and we don't really need to go through the specifics of it, but as you can see, there's acceptable criteria, and if you meet the criteria, then we can go ahead and give you the certificate. So the first step of the process would be to fill out your application at FAA MedExpress. You can see the address here. I will also put this in the description. And this is one of my heroes, Chuck Yeager, who obviously was the first person to break the sound of speed. And I love the saying, if you can walk away from a landing, it's a good landing. If you can use the airplane the next day, it's been an outstanding landing. So what questions will you see on the MedExpress form? Essentially, it's a brief medical history that involves items that may be of concern to the FAA. In general, it's any medications that you take. Do you have any physical limitations? Have you had any hospitalizations? Is there any history of medical health issues? Is there any history of substance abuse? So I'm going to throw in some tidbits of MedExpress advice here. And, if you're super healthy and you don't take any medications, you're not going to have any problems. If you do have health problems, then you need to tell a consistent story. And for example, don't mark no for all the health conditions, but then mark yes for something like a medical rejection or disability benefits. It should all add up. And looking at this plane, it doesn't add up. So if there's any concern of medical history, then you should probably research it before your aviation medical examiner examination, and probably before you fill out the MedExpress form. Because when your doctor who's doing the physical imports your application, using the confirmation number and saves it in the FAA medical certification system, this application now becomes a permanent record. You need to list a reason for all visits to healthcare professionals. Now, I do like to go off track a little bit. Again, I have aviation heroes, and Charles Lindbergh certainly was one of them. And we're discussing reasoning here. And someone asked Charles Lindbergh once why there was only one engine on the Spirit of St. Louis, and wouldn't he be better off having two engines if something happened to one? And Charles Lindbergh's answer was very simple. Essentially, he said that if you have two engines, you have twice as much chance of something going wrong. So he was better off just having the one engine. You can argue with that reasoning, but at least he listed a reason. You should always have a corresponding medical condition for every medication you take and disability you have. So for all intents and purposes, the math should add up. So if you list a medical condition, or if you list a medication, you should certainly have a reason that you're taking that medication. If you have a medical condition, you should provide a brief statement about each one. And so as a rule of thumb, if you need to use more than one sentence to describe your medical condition, you probably should have a detailed clinical progress note from your doctor at your exam. So let's say you really screw up. You really messed up the application and you don't feel that you can fix the errors. So as long as you have not taken it, you have not seen your aviation medical examiner and he has not imported your document to AMCS, MedExpress applications will automatically be deleted after 60 days of inactivity. So you can just wait it out and then start over after 60 days because at that point, it's not considered a permanent record. So you certainly, and this goes to other parts of your life as well, you want to retain copies of your generated application for future reference, as this makes it much easier to remember what you wrote the last time. Another one of my heroes is Mike Massimo. He is, well, of course, he is a T-38 pilot because all astronauts are. He was a shuttle engineer on STS-125 and STS-109, and he's a very entertaining guy, and he has a series of YouTube videos where he talks about being in space. I find him very enjoyable. He is notably the first person to tweet from space, and he's the first person to order a pizza from space, and they had it delivered to the space shuttle landing area about 20 minutes after they put her on the ground. So, upon successful submission of your electronic application, you're going to be given a confirmation number. Now you've just started the clock, and you have 60 days to get your appointment with your doctor for your examination and to get this thing complete. So when you come to your appointment with your medical examiner, you should bring your confirmation number with you. And be noted, if you forget that number, the aviation medical examiner will not be able to access your application without that confirmation number, and you're going to slow the process down. So this may be a dumb question, but should I try to hide my health conditions or addictions? Well, the obvious answer is no. Mostly because the FAA will find out. And if you lie, you're subject to a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in jail. It's happened. It's better to be honest with the FAA up front because the reality is they will make every effort to keep you in the sky. Of course, this is within reason because there are some health conditions that can't be fixed. Now, I can't speak for other aviation medical examiners, but if you have health problems, especially unresolved ones, just give me a call first before submitting your application. And Yeah, again, the number's down in the number, a contact number will be down in the description, and I'll be certainly glad to try and help you through this and keep it as expedient as possible so you can stay within your timelines. Why should you call first? Because once your official visit starts at the clinic, we have 14 days to submit my report and conclusion. If you call first, it will allow us to get advice from the FAA medical team if needed. I can call them without officially starting the process. And it will allow more time for you to get any physician consults done, get the paperwork together. And like I said, once we start the process, there's a clock ticking, and it's hard to get all this stuff done in 14 days. It's a lot easier to get it done still under the 60 days when you have your MedExpress finished. What should you expect at your aviation physical appointment? Well, luckily for everybody involved, this is not one of them. We don't do rectal exams at the aviation physical appointment unless there's a very specific reason. We also don't poke you in the eyes, but we do test your vision. It's required that you have 20/40 vision in each eye, with or without correction. This is done with a standard Snellen eye chart and a near vision acuity chart. There's also color vision testing, which is done with a pseudo-isochromatic plate. It's okay to be colorblind, but you have to be able to see the colors that allow you to operate safely. We're going to test your hearing, and essentially you just need to have proper hearing for an average conversational voice in a quiet room using both ears at 6 feet with your back turned to the examiner. Or you can pass an audiometric test. ENT-wise, you can't have any ear condition or any condition that contributes to vertigo or a disturbance of speech or equilibrium. There is some heart testing, but it's pretty basic. We check your blood pressure. You have to have something less than 155 over 95. And there's also, for class 1, there's an EKG, which starts at age 35 and is annual after age 40. You can't have a diagnosis of psychosis or bipolar disorder or severe personality disorders. Again, that is a special issuance, and if there's an issue like that, then we will have to defer that to the FAA, and they will give us guidelines on how to proceed. Substance abuse is a big issue, and again, I apologize, this is another wordy slide, but the wording is important. So a diagnosis or medical history of a substance dependence is disqualifying unless there is an established clinical evidence satisfactory to the federal air surgeon of recovery, including sustained total abstinence from the substances for not less than the preceding 2 years. A history of substance abuse within the preceding 2 years is disqualifying. Substances include alcohol and other drugs, PCP, sedatives and hypnotics, anxiolytics, marijuana, cocaine, opioids, amphetamines, hallucinogens, and other psychoactive drugs or chemicals. I'm going to offer up some final thoughts and perhaps a bit of advice. So let's imagine that I offered everyone in here a plane of their choice. Any plane. But the condition is it's the only plane that you'll ever have or use. It has to do everything for the rest of your life. So of course you would pick the bigliest, the bestest, and the most magnificent plane, much better than that other guy's plane. And of course you would take extraordinary care of that plane, because you would want to ensure a long and reliable term of service, because it's forever. So if you would do that for a plane, why do we treat our bodies like this? With patchwork and duct tape? I would offer up that when we talk about this plane, of course, I'm referring to your body. and that preventive maintenance is much easier than restoration. If you guys are familiar, or if you're a fan of warbirds like I am, you will recognize Glacier Girl, which was, there's a number of P-38s that were forced to land in the Antarctic during the war, and they were never recovered. Some 50 odd years later, they were found again, and they were 250 feet under the ice. Someone went and got them, and they were able to recover them. It was not an easy process. It would have been a lot easier to have picked up the planes off of the ice before they sank and lingered for years. So to improve your own service life, obviously eating healthy is very important. You should get a full night's sleep, and don't drink alcohol, especially while flying. Don't smoke, and in particular, don't smoke this way because this is bad, and exercise. And of course, the best bit of advice that I can offer is that we should all be like Daedalus and less like Icarus. Icarus was the foolish boy who flew too close to the sun. The wax on his wings melted. Daedalus stayed low, and he escaped and lived a long and happy life. If you guys have any questions, certainly feel free to ask in the comments. I look forward to seeing you in the clinic. You guys have a great day.